Hi, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have full review of the Xiaomi 14T Pro. You have to start. I know I took too long to bring this review, but I hope you will be satisfied after all the information I'm going to give you about it. To begin with, the launch price in Mexico has been 16,999 pesos. This is more or less $830. But remember that the prices here are not the same as there. It seems to me a slightly higher price than we would like, but you have to consider that in this case, it comes with 512 gigabytes of storage and 12 gigabytes of RAM. I would consider it a better strategy to offer a slightly tighter price, even if they bring us the 256 gigabytes version, which I think would still be a good thing, but with a slightly lower price. At this price, it really is a bit tricky. In fact, any competitor in the same price range has also same review. This price range is practically the entry to the high end. So with a little more money you invest, you can already acquire a fully flagship device. So I insist that the price does not end up convincing me too much, but if you buy it in the Xiaomi online store, to convince you, they will offer you 4 months of Spotify Premium, 6 months of Google One with 100 gigabytes of cloud storage, 3 months of YouTube Premium, then I think for what? Less if you get these additional ones that can draw attention. This obviously, in the case of Mexico, I do not know in other countries how it is handled, but at least that is the strategy here. Even in some stores also give you a Redmi watch, then that is also something positive of the distribution that has this device. You can find it in online stores as well as in phone companies and even department stores, so I think it is relatively easy to find the best deal. However, Xiaomi may have some complications with the gray market, so if you are going to buy it in Mexico, make sure it is an official distributor if you want to get all the benefits that Xiaomi promises and the support and warranty. But once we have made this warning, let's go to describe it physically. The feeling in the design sincerely that if it is as high-end, the front looks with very thin bezels. Takes advantage perfectly well of this front part with a lot of area for the screen. However, in terms of resistance, we do not find something as advanced as it does not have Gorilla Glass. We do not know if Xiaomi has used some other special glass to try to protect the screen, but at least in that sense we are not so confident of the durability that could get to have the device. On the sides, we will fortunately find aluminum frames, which could even benefit the resistance of the screen, since in case of a fall. Aluminum, I think it will resist in a much more intense way. In fact, this aluminum Xiaomi calls it as M, which supposedly offers tremendous resistance. On the right side, we find a textured power button to recognize it easily to the touch and also volume buttons. On the top, we are going to find infrared for universal remote control and microphone grills. While on the left side, we find the frame completely clean, but it serves. For the thickness of this device is 8 and 39 millimeters, so it is not characterized by being ultra thin. At the bottom we are going to find the tray where we can place 2 SIM cards, unless you buy it with some phone company that blocks the second tray, so pay attention to this data. Then we will find a microphone, the USB-C port, and finally the main grill for the speaker. The back is made of glass. In this edition that I have in my hands, looks even as if it were metallic. The truth looks very nice. This edition is called Titan Grey, but it is also available in Titan Blue and finally Titan Black. All have the surname Titan because they all have this very nice satin finish that if you get to stain a little with your fingers, but it is nothing serious. I really like the back cover design. Although the design of the camera module reminds me a bit more of Xiaomi's low-end devices and little, so I don't find it as original or as aesthetically appealing due to how repetitive. This design can be on inferior devices. Fortunately, in terms of resistance, it supports IP68, so it is resistant against water and dust. In that sense, you would not have to worry if you get to fall into the water, although obviously, in this price range, that is your obligation. We cannot ask for less. Finally, its weight is 209 grams. It is perceived in the hand as a premium device. It does not feel so light. So it is a solid block of very good quality. The screen, in the most faithful Xiaomi style, has a size of 6.67 inches in its diagonal, resolution 1.5K, that is 2710 x 2020 pixels. So it is a super detailed screen, everything is going to look very sharp, plus it has AMOLED technology, so everything. It is also going to be seen with an excellent image quality in terms of contrast management and color intensity and more. In fact, through software it has good color calibration options, so you can modify all these completely to your liking. There are 4 options available, and within advanced settings you can still modify the range of colors you want to cover the screen, and specifically the RGB control, including saturation, contrast and many more parameters. The truth is a screen that you can completely modify to your liking. It also has manual color temperature adjustment, but also an option called adaptive colors that will try to simulate the ambient color. So it could also be useful in some scenarios. This screen has 144 Hz in its refresh rate, so it is super fluid. Obviously it will adjust automatically to not consume so much battery, or you can adjust it manually, although it does not. I highly recommend it. The touch sampling rate is 480 Hz, so it also responds very fast to touches, and the brightness control is also very precise thanks to its dimming rate, which goes all the way up to 3840 Hz. So the lower brightness, you're going to notice that it's quite comfortable. No uncomfortable screen flickering is generated, although it doesn't have the extra dimming option. I would have quite liked that because almost every Android incorporates it. However, with respect to the highest brightness, we are going to find a completely satisfactory experience. It peaks at 4000 nits, as long as you are watching HDR content, as it supports Dolby Vision and HDR10. But even under the sunlight, without watching HDR content, you can activate a sunlight mode that will raise the brightness of the screen to a level too high, so the display is completely good in any kind of scenario. It's a screen that without a doubt is completely flagship. Here they haven't done any kind of clipping or anything like that. In the sound, we are going to find positive things. If it has stereo sound, so it has main speaker at the bottom, one secondary speaker at the top. The secondary speaker has an audio output in the headphone area for calls, so it's not going to be so attractive. This speaker is not as good as the speaker below, but overall they achieve a sufficiently well-balanced sound. Honestly, for my taste, it doesn't sound as good on standard EQ, but fortunately, it has a 10-band EQ available for you to tweak the audio completely to your liking. That's a perfect thing. Next, we are going to listen to a test. Although remember that it is not the same to listen to it live, and you are going to listen to both the test with the standard EQ. Like the test with the equalization I used, because I personally prefer to lower the mid and mid-bass frequencies to achieve a better quality sound to my taste. But let's listen to the test. And also through software, we are going to find Dolby Atmos and Xiaomi sound to create different custom sound effects depending if you want to use headphones or want to use surround sound settings. So, we have good sound features for the speaker. However, it does not have headphone jack, although it is expected in the price range. It's not a surprise, but I mention it in case you thought it did. So you'll need to use wired headphones in case you want to use a headphone jack. You need to play so you have absolutely no latency. But if you're going to use the headphones to listen to music, there is good news. It supports LHDC in version 3 aptX, and also LDSIC as a high-resolution audio codecs. So if you buy headphones compatible with this codec, you will be able to enjoy a very high-resolution audio. Regarding the microphones, we will find 3 distributed in the device. Let's listen to a test of these microphones.
Esta es una prueba grabada con los micrófonos integrados del Xiaomi 14T Pro.
Then let's hear how it behaves in a much noisier environment simulating a concert. They think that in these environments the microphones don't perform as well. It seems that the loudest hits of sound make the gain go down and then try to turn it up immediately, and that can generate an out of control. The truth does not seem to be such an attractive option for recording concerts. And to close this block, I remind you that it has a vibration motor on the x-axis, so it is a premium vibration as it should in this price range.
1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16 17 18 19 20 21 22 23 24 25 26 27 28 29 30 31 32 33 34 35 36 37 38 39 40 41 42 43 44 45 46 47 48 49 50 51 52 53 54 55 56 57 58 59 60 61 62 63 64 65 66 67 68 69 70 71 72 73 74 75 76 77 78 79 80 81 82 83 84 85 86 87 88 89 90 91 92 93 94 95 96 97 98 99 100 101 102 103 104 105 106 107 108 109 110 111 112 113 114 115 116 117 118 119 120 121 122 123 124 125 126 127 128 129 130 131 132 133 134 135 136 137 138 139 140 141 142 143 144 145 146 147 148 149 150 151 152 153
The front camera is 32 megapixels with f2.0 point aperture and fixed focus, placed in a circular cutout inside the screen. I should anticipate you that while it sounds like a very attractive thing to have 32 megapixels, the reality of things is that the camera doesn't seem to be as detailed, or at least doesn't seem to give as high a quality as one would expect. But before we look at the results, let's talk a bit about the experience. In this case, you can open the camera by double pressing the volume down button for a quick open. Or even if you have the screen on and you are in some application, you can double press the on-off button to do the same action. Then, I think if it allows you an agile execution of the camera. Notice that the response of the front camera is really very good. It doesn't seem to freeze or anything like that. That's a positive. Also, if you swipe down, you can bring up a special menu where you can also activate palm capture or even touching any area of the screen to capture more comfortably in those moments where it's a bit tricky to reach the shutter. And as additional options, note that there is a button where you have the beauty mode with a tremendous amount of parameters. There are really many options, even modifies the lips, chin, cheekbones, and many things. The more the truth is, they are endless. And there is also another button to activate some special color filter, and you can view all of them in real time. The results of this camera seem to me a bit simple for the price that this device has. It definitely seems that here they have cut a little bit of the budget. It's not a bad picture, but I think it's not up to the level of what one would expect at this price point. I perceive the colors a bit strange, some areas slightly overexposed, and it has fixed focus in backlit scenarios. The preview is obviously not well optimized, but the already processed results seems positive to me. In fact, curiously in this picture, I think the colors are a little better represented, but it is still not a very attractive picture, so it is not his specialty, although he doesn't take bad pictures either. However, if you need a good amount of light, as for example in indoor scenarios, you will notice much less level of detail. Try to eliminate noise without sacrificing as much detail. But you do notice quite a big difference between brightly lit photos and indoor scenes. And at night, for example, if you are near a light source, if you have a good result, you can see a good level of detail. Still good textures and virtually no presence. The noise is reduced. But note, for example, in backlit night scenarios that the result is quite simple. Even other Xiaomi devices of lower ranges have taken more attractive results. If you use the night mode, you could get to improve this photography a bit. But honestly, you can tell that it is not a camera that is up to what one would expect at this price. However, the selfie portrait photography is really very good. I find it curious how the photo quality improves so much when you use portrait mode, so possibly through software and some updates they can improve and refine the performance of the front camera without portrait mode. Because with portrait mode it is very good. In fact, notice how in the daytime also with portrait mode the colors are very nice. The bokeh effect is also very professional. And in this case it manages to keep the objects in the foreground in focus. So I insist, it is a somewhat strange feeling because in portrait mode I find it excellent. But without portrait mode it seems to me a camera below the expected level. On the back we're going to find a 3-camera system. First a 15mm ultra-wide camera, so it is not so wide. 12 megapixels on the sensor and f2.2 aperture with fixed focus. I think this is the simplest of the 3. Then we find the main camera of 50 megapixels with a focal length of 23mm. Its aperture is f1.6, it has autofocus and optical stabilization, so this is the most attractive. In fact, it uses OmniVision's Light Fusion 900 sensor. And finally, the telephoto camera of 60mm in its focal length. That is more or less 2.5x optical zoom. It has 50 megapixels on the sensor, f-aperture 2.0 and autofocus. I like the fact that it has this functional 3-camera system. It doesn't have any marketing cameras, although the optical zoom can come up a bit short. So probably at very far zoom, we're not going to find something as appealing. However, the positive thing is that it has f-aperture 2.0, which in theory is brighter and should give you better performance, although I anticipate that in situations, or in fact does not use the telephoto camera, which I find curious because it has an aperture. It is good enough, but Xiaomi gives preference to digital zoom when the environment is very dark. Let's again test the performance it has, and as you notice here on the back camera, it has a little bit more lag when you're taking a lot of pictures, especially if you're in need of HDR, but either way it looks fast responsive. In fact, you don't even need to worry too much about capturing at exactly the right moment, as it corrects the photos with about a quarter of a second to a quarter of a second of a second of second. So it's funny how you send the picture actually comes out before you've pressed the shutter. It has a kind of buffer there. And remember, for the burst, you can slide the shutter to the right, and in this case, it can give you a burst of up to 50 pictures. Notice that the burst takes about a quarter of a second to start, but there's very little space between one picture and the next. So really, if you could extract the exact moment of the picture that you wanted. In the camera interface, we're going to find a manual control for the exposure, which can be useful in dark environments where sometimes cell phones overdrive the light. So here you can control it perfectly well. We also have the beauty mode with a single parameter unlike the front camera. And we also have different color filters that we can use. In the menu, we are also going to find some options such as the timer. And also if you want the brand, like a water detection among a few other things. If you touch the screen, you can adjust the exposure and also the focus, but there is also Pro mode available, where of course you can take pictures in RAW if you wanted to, and you have manual controls over the white balance, the focus, of course also the shutter speed, which can go up to 30 seconds, or the ISO, which can go up to 6400, which is not something that advanced, but there are the manual settings available to you. In fact, even in Pro mode, we are going to find both color renditions that Leica offers, both Leica Vibrant and Leica True, and this same control is available from Auto mode. So we have these two interpretations which of course are going to generate very attractive results. The color handling that Leica has I really liked. We'll see in a moment the results. But before that, regarding the intelligent capture, note that it doesn't have an immediate detection. The ultra-wide camera does not have a document mode, but it does allow you to enter a document mode to make this capture. In fact, you could activate a color filter if you want the picture to look not just like a photograph, but like a more advanced scan. If you press the document button, you can also edit the color rendition, adjust the cropping in case 100% was not done where you wanted, and you can also remove stains or some notes. For example, let's select that we want to remove smudges and look at the comparison. I think it's perfectly well optimized. And to scan QR code also appears a small button on the right side to be able to execute the action, all without the need to install a QR code reader or something like that, but simply from the main camera interface. The ultra-wide camera seems to me to have a good quality. The colors are perceived worked by Leica. If it gives this feeling of a little more marked contrast with the shadows present. Evidently with the ultra-wide camera you will not have the maximum, but that is not its objective. But its objective is to have more amplitude, and in that sense it complies. But I think it does need to improve a little more the noise management, since you can see many artifacts even in this area that has good lighting in the sky. With the main camera, of course, we will find a better quality. There is better detail, better noise management. Also the lighting and colors are correct. So the camera seemed to me to be of very good quality. Fortunately, neither the ultra-wide camera nor the main camera seem to have distortions or blur on the edges. In this case, the device also allows you to have the perspective of 46mm through a crop on the sensor, maintaining optical quality, and indeed if you have very good quality in this intermediate zoom 2x. I find the result excellent, almost as if you effectively had a telephoto lens 46mm. Then we come to the 60mm lens, which in this case is a physical lens, so we see an excellent level of detail. It seems to me that in all this intermediate zoom range, we will find excellent quality, because it also maintains good color rendition and good contrast that characterizes Leica photos. It even allows us to reach 120mm, that is 5x zoom, still making a good effort to maintain optical quality, and indeed the result is very good. Good. Some glare is generated on the edges of the most illuminated areas, but the truth is not something really annoying considering the good zoom capability that would get to have this device. Here we are talking about zoom 5x and it still looks very good quality. But we change scenery to continue talking about the zoom. Now watch. We are here at 120mm with zoom 5x and honestly it looks very good. Now we're looking at the 10x zoom, where again it still maintains good quality, although the flare that's generated at the edges is a little bit more visible. So that can get to generate a little bit of an odd feel to the photograph. So I'd say at intermediate zoom it's great. At maximum zoom it can come up a little short. In fact, this is the maximum zoom 30x. That is 720mm. Note that although he tries to optimize some sections well, it is no longer possible because the optical zoom is a bit short. However, I insist that at medium distances the zoom is really quite remarkable. Observe from what distance we were taking the picture, and now on the contrary, if instead of getting closer you want to get farther away. This is the widest that the ultra-wide camera offers us. which I already anticipated that it offers us a little more noise than we would like, but now observe. The difference with panoramic photography. In this case, the panoramic photography is with the main camera, so it offers a very good image quality. However, here it seems that if you get to notice some areas of fusion between the photographs, even we will notice some areas a little out of focus, so the panoramic photo seems that it is not the best. Regarding the backlit photo, note that we are going to notice a fairly well optimized preview. It does not look overexposed, and the results are also positive as far as they go, because the faces still seem to be a bit dark. Let's say it's not as consistent in its results, because you notice that in this ultra-wide camera, it's a little bit dark in the shadow area. With the main camera, we see something very similar, slightly improving the shadow area, but notice that when we switch to the telephoto lens, the opposite happens. The shadow area is well lit, but the highlight area is very overexposed. So I insist that I still think it needs some updates to perfect this behavior. In indoor scenarios, we will also see some small differences in color rendition between these cameras. The ultra-wide looks good to me. The main one slightly ups the saturation but still looks somewhat positive, but the telephoto camera gives a slightly warmer color rendering. So it would be much better if all three cameras maintained a similar feel. The colors are much more consistent, but notice how even in indoor settings the zoom performs quite well. At night we're also going to see a good performance. I like the color rendering with this warm light that was there in reality. The ultra-wide camera also performs well, controlling noise well and even handling the brighter areas well. The main camera is going to give us a very similar result in this regard. If we are going to find consistency between both cameras and still a very positive noise management so that in the darker areas comes out enough. Clarity without losing level of detail. With the 60mm camera, we will also find a good experience in this type of photography. Note that the most illuminated area is not overexposed. The darker areas are sufficiently well lit with controlled noise. I really like the night photography, and in darker areas where there is no light source present, you will notice that the ultra-wide camera has a little more complications to maintain a good level of detail. The main camera is clearly getting better at capturing detail, giving a very attractive result, and note that the darker areas are still kept dark enough for a realistic photo. Although with the night mode, note that it increases even more the presence of light and could look a bit artificial, the result, depending on your tastes. If you try to zoom in on a very dark area, you will notice that you will actually use digital zoom instead of optical zoom, so pay attention to that. By the way, if you wanted to take pictures of the moon, it is not possible with this phone. Regarding the high resolution mode, this device does give a considerably high level of detail, which would allow you to crop your photos and still maintain excellent detail. In this sense, it delivers perfectly. Motion photography also performs well with both the ultra-wide camera and the main camera, and even the telephoto camera will perform well in these scenarios. Macro photography is a bit tricky in this device. This is the closest you can get to small objects with the main camera, and obviously, note that the focus will be uneven. There will be edges that will be muddy or smudged, so it is advisable to move a little further away. If you zoom out and apply DOS X digital zoom, I think the result is more pleasing. Note that the focus is more uniform and we even have better color representation. If you want to use the telephoto camera, you will notice that it doesn't really have macro capabilities. So pretty much anytime you are zooming in on a small object, you will be using digital zoom and no optical zoom. The optical zoom is pretty far away, so it's not very functional for macro photography. But if you use the 5x zoom, even though it's completely digital, I think it would allow you to have some super detailed macro shots. So I tell you, it's a little tricky to take the picture, but the results can be positive. Finally, with respect to portrait photography, note that with the main camera it is possible to take these pictures. Although it is possible to take the portrait pictures with the main camera. The blur is not so aggressive to have a natural result. 35mm perspective is also available, and note that the background blur is increasing in intensity, as I say, to give a natural feel. This has obviously been worked out in collaboration with Leica in a very good way. With 60mm, the bokeh effect is much nicer in the background, and note that the detection is very good in the foreground. There is no blurring or blurring at the edges, and if you are looking for a more natural feel to the background, you will notice that the detection is very good in the foreground. Keeps objects in focus. It also allows you to do portrait photography with a 75mm setting, and I think this is the best setting for these shots to have a more professional telephoto effect with a nicer bokeh effect in the background. Although he notes that in the evenings he had some complications with the 60mm setting, where he wasn't able to keep a subject in focus, which was quite tricky. But I wanted to give him a tough test, and in this case he didn't pass. Fortunately, with the 75mm setting, I've managed to keep this object in focus, so there may be times where you need to give 2 attempts for a good portrait photograph. Although at night, we could get to lose quite a bit of texture and lighting due to the telephoto lens. For video recording, we will find compatibility up to 8K at 30 frames per second. Obviously this only with the main camera, but the simple fact of finding this compatibility is something positive. I think with this it makes it very clear to us that its main competitor will be the Galaxy S24 FE, which in many ways are similar. So let me know in the comments if you would also like a comparison between these two. Notice that at the top we can go changing the resolution. Although this is a bit more time consuming, I think it is easier in the menu, which fortunately is also available here at Xiaomi. The ultra-wide camera does not have such advanced video recording capabilities. So if you choose, for example, 8K, you are going to notice that the selector for the ultra-wide camera does not appear. So you should see well in what resolution you're recording so you can use all the lenses. Note also that there is an HDR mode, although it is not an advanced HDR that plays on a special monitor, but a simple HDR. Something I also like is that it includes the Master Cinema mode, which somehow will take a more cinematic coloring very nice. So if you like to record videos with a little more cinematic coloring, you can achieve it through this preset. However, there are also colors on the bottom that you can use. Some of them note that are also worked hand in hand with Leica, but the 4K recording is not available. Special. There is also the beauty mode, just like in photography with a single parameter and exposure compensation, which I insist can be very useful in dark scenes. While you are recording a video, note that you have the possibility to pause or resume a recording, also to take the picture or create a bookmark to review later in the gallery the best moments of your video. But note that you can't turn on the flashlight, which I find very curious. Obviously, if you stop recording, that button is enabled, but you can't rotate the front camera either. So I think there are still several little things here where Xiaomi could improve the video recording experience. Where fortunately it is very well is in the professional video recording mode, where it knows that we will find again all these parameters, and even while we are recording the video we can. The new features allow you to change parameters such as focus, ISO, and other things that allow you a much more advanced recording of your USAN content. Even in the menu you will find, for example, an option to check the exposure. Then when an overexposed area appears that called zebra, that, as I say, serves you much as a reference. Even allows you to record in a log format to color it later and have all these color properties that you can take advantage of in softwares, specialized later on. In fact, when you're in log mode, it also has a button that says LUT, where you can load your own LUTs to interpret the color the way you want. It's quite useful and curious, and so far I had seen other devices with the ability to log, but not with the ability to load your own LUTs. But let's take a look at the results directly. The results are obviously positive, having this high resolution available in the 3 cameras. In fact, the ultra-wide camera records remarkably well outdoors. Note that there is a good level of detail and good color. No aggressive jumps in exposure or anything like that. Switching the main camera if you notice a USAN jump. So the main camera will definitely be the one with the highest image quality, and the telephoto camera changes color a bit. So again, just like the photography, it doesn't seem to have good color consistency between the 3 cameras. Regarding the zoom, if you can go smoothly, although the maximum is 15x, here it is much more noticeable how limited the device is in terms of maximum zoom. Although in photography still at this distance behaved quite well, but in video is left owing, and the abrupt color change between the 3 cameras is what I like the least. Note that, for example, indoors you will notice even more this change between the ultra-wide camera and the main camera, where it even changes the contrast a little more. But the one that still changes the color more intensely is the telephoto camera. Note that the color becomes too warm, even too saturated. So you definitely have to improve the color management between these cameras that do not give the experience of being a camera like what you would expect in a device. I don't think it's a good value for this price, but it does feel like 3 completely separate cameras. I think indoors it was much more obvious the change in coloration than outdoors. For backlit scenarios, the device offers an HDR mode that comes turned off by default. Right now we are looking at the result with this option turned off, and note that a bit of noise appears in the darker areas, but we don't really see aggressive jumps in exposure. Recording with the ultra-wide camera still maintains a stable lighting, although if the face is a little closer, you will notice that it starts to overexpose a little to the more illuminated area. Changing the main camera even darker the shadow area, although as I say, fortunately it does not make too aggressive jumps in lighting unless the face is a little closer to the camera. And exactly the same is going to happen with the telephoto camera, where it seems to me that we find the most balanced result, although also the focus could get confused and would give priority to focus on the most illuminated areas. With the HDR mode, the truth is that there are not so many differences. The ultra-wide camera still shows a very similar quality in its image. Again, we will notice that the illuminated area is slightly overexposed if the face is closer. When switching to the main camera, again darkens. The shadow area, honestly, there is no big change when you use or don't use HDR mode, so it makes no difference in this sense. I think Xiaomi could also improve a bit more its video recording in backlight, and at night, notice that the ultra-wide camera is going to get to suffer much more. You can tell it tries to remove noise. But along with the noise, it removes some textures and some details. It is not able to correctly expose the most illuminated areas and even white balance. It can get to have a little more aggressive jumps. So it is clear that the ultra-wide camera does not have such high capabilities, but note the big difference that is noticeable when switching to the main camera. The color will be much more accurate. It also eliminates a lot of noise without removing detail. Then it is advisable to record with this main camera at night. Although it still does not have the ability to properly expose the most illuminated areas, but I think that still is. We can be forgiving. When we make the switch to the telephoto camera, note that if you are in a lit area, it will make the change. But it definitely costs a lot in darker areas, where a lot of noise will appear. Again, the white balance could become a little unstable, although honestly it looks quite realistic result, because if it was a remarkably dark scene, then we will notice something positive. Note the difference when we put digital zoom, and in this case, if you are in a very dark area, even if you apply zoom will not switch to the telephoto camera, but will bet 100% for Cinto by its digital zoom. With regard to stabilization, note that without any special mode activated, we will find enough stabilization when walking. However, when you go running, if you can get to move too much the scene. So it is not so advisable to record scenes of too much action without any mode frames. Fortunately, the device incorporates a mode called constant video that really does improve. When you are walking, does not make much difference. But note that when you are running, if you see a scene with much less movement than the traditional mode, in fact this device also has the constant video pro mode that has even more stabilization. Although the image resolution is reduced, but I think it does help to regulate the movement in scenes of too much action. So in this sense, it does deliver. Regarding the focus, it is a little slow. It does not seem to have an immediate response. Although this also causes that in more subtle movements, you do not get to notice too much the moment of refocusing. However, I think it does notice a little slow, although that will depend entirely on the taste of each person. This device also incorporates a photo recording mode. It is within the movie mode, so by default it will record 24 frames per second. In fact, you cannot change that option and records in an ultra panoramic format by default, although this option, if you can change it to a more traditional format. Note that something positive about this mode is that if you change the intensity of the blur if I am very far from the camera, and also makes a good effort to keep focused on the objects. So the result seems to me very positive for recording, although it is not compatible with K resolution. In fact, it has another mode. Recording that supposedly will have a wider blur, perhaps it will be more noticeable at night with backlights. As in my tests, I did not notice too much difference between one mode and another. This device also incorporates a fast camera mode in 4K that can go from 4x, so you could record movements of people walking or more subtle movements with a good experience, or it could go up to 1/800x with which you could record in a more spectacular way the landscapes, so you'll offers good capabilities in this regard and also has good slow motion options in Full HD at 120 frames per second would be the most basic. The result I think is good. You can even go up to 240 frames per second also in Full HD, with which you would have more slowness without losing video quality. Although it does not support any slow motion in 4K, you can even get up to 960 frames per second in Full HD. Although it is only a fragment of the video, it does not resume at normal speed. So the result can look a bit strange, unlike other devices that have an attractive super slow motion mode. The front camera knows that it's going to give us a fairly close framing to favor stabilization, but that will cause you to need to stretch your arm a lot, and if you stretch your arm too much, you'll probably come out a bit out of focus. I think the color is acceptable, and note that even in backlighting, it makes a very good effort to balance the lights well. And shadows, although it is clear that if you get to overexpose the highlights, but I think it does not get to burn completely as in some other devices, so I think it's not bad. Indoors, we will also notice a good enough quality, although I insist that the framing is very close and you need to stretch your arm too much to be able to get well framed. There are some jumps in the white balance that cause a weird pigmentation on the skin as well, so it remains a little bit too dark. Confirm that the front camera of this device is not very good. At night we will notice that if you are in front of a light source, the result will be fine in terms of light, but the color again looks with a somewhat strange pigmentation. And if you move away from the most illuminated areas, you will obviously notice more noise presence. The stabilization generates some uncomfortable vibration in these low light settings, so while it's not a disaster, I think it's not up to par with what you would expect from a device of this price. We are also going to find a fast motion mode for the front camera, just as a fun fact. And we also have a slow motion mode at 120 frames per second. Nothing spectacular, but useful even on the front camera. You can also use the portrait recording mode that blurs the background, and the truth is that it does very well. I was surprised by the good quality that has this mode. You do not see the cloudy edges and is even able to keep focused on certain objects, although the resolution is full HD. But honestly, the performance has seemed very good to me, possibly one of its strongest points. And finally, note that you can also record with both cameras at the same time. It can be in split screen or picture-in-picture mode. In fact, you can transition without stopping the video recording. The frame, you can move it along the screen. It has the focus enabled, it also has the zoom enabled. So it has good options for this kind of recordings that could be useful for bloggers. Regarding the software, we will find Android 14 and on top of it, running Xiaomi's HyperOS in its version 107. Curiously, it still does not receive the update to HyperOS. So maybe the updates go a little slow, but it has the promise of receiving 4 years of software updates, 5 years of security patches, with which it definitely gets up to what one would expect from a device at this price. Let me show you some options that the manufacturer adds to customize the device. As for example, we will find a modification for the lock screen, which gives you different types of covers, some in magazine format, others in different formats that we can customize with our own photos. In fact, it can detect the depth of the photograph to put text behind you or similar things. The truth is that in this sense we reach a very nice level of customization for the lock screen. It also has the always on display feature to show you some special cover while you have the lock device, and at the same time shows you the time and additional information. You have digital clocks, analog and some other styles. We also found an option to illuminate the edges of the screen when you receive a notification, although it is simple and since it has no curved screen, I do not see much sense. It must be said that in addition to the wallpapers that brings to explore, in this case also has the feature of super wallpapers that Xiaomi integrates on their flagship devices, although in this case you have to download them, so it takes a little time to download and install these packages. But subsequently we are going to find an excellent transition between the lock screen, the always on display faceplate and even the unlock screen as well. Notice how it makes the transition to look like a single animation. So then it looks interesting how it can transform from the cover something made a display to the home screen with nice transitions. There are 3 available in case you want to use them, or else there are static backgrounds as well. Something important is also that the device has a function so that the screen does not turn off while it detects that you are looking at the device. It also has a gesture to activate the screen when you turn the device, or also to double tap to turn off the screen when you're on the lock screen, as Whitehouse and Denon's Onesie, similar things. Obviously that the device has a theme store where you can access to customize even more areas of your device, including the lock screen and other elements, so the level of customization you reach is quite extreme. And consider also that it has some other gestures to use the device, such as swiping 3 fingers down to take screenshots quite easily, or you can even hold 3 fingers to take a screenshot with a crop, different and not necessarily the full screen. We will also be able to turn on the flashlight if we double tap the power button, but this gesture replaces the gesture to open the camera, so you choose what you prefer. We will also find the floating ball with which we can easily navigate the system. Just watch how these buttons unfold, which we can obviously customize to have different actions. The one-handed mode, personally, I like it because it only adjusts the content vertically, plus it's quite complicated to activate it. Note that in this case, it took me a long time to be able to activate it, and I can't reach things that are on the other edge of the screen so easily. The device also has a small sidebar through which we can open applications in floating mode. In fact, we can also adjust the size of these small applications, and we can run 2 applications at the same time, so it is useful for multitasking issues. However, note that, for example, although Instagram is available, YouTube, which is another popular app, is not available to be opened in this floating mode. Of course, we can also open applications in a split screen format. In fact, we can transform the floating view to a split screen view by simply doing this action, and in this case, the applications remain linked directly in the list of recent applications. But this sidebar not only serves to open applications, but it will also give us more tools in games that we will see later. And for example, when you are inside a video application, a menu also appears where you can raise the resolution of the video. So in case it is not so clear, you can see more clearly through artificial intelligence. You can also change the style of the colors of the screen when viewing these videos, and we also find a selector that improves the movement of the images. You can also manage whether or not you want Dolby Atmos and other sound features, so that when playing all this multimedia content, you have a good experience. It also includes a button to record the screen, another button for screenshots, and another button to project the screen wirelessly. Plus, you can turn on the artificial intelligence subtitles by listening to the audio of the system, so you can go reading in the same language or even translate them. And if you are in a video call, you will also notice that in this sidebar, other options appear, for example, to better illuminate your face through this fill light option. You also have an option to translate what you are saying in real time, which comes in quite well, although you must give the prices permissions. And this may be a bit complicated for some people because you have to look for specifically which application is the one to activate, which in this case is MyDito. But, well, this interpreter, as I say, can show you the subtitles of the person to be able to understand what they are saying. And in the same way, there are the subtitles. So these are some tools that Xiaomi adds in its sidebar. We will also find the option of rhythm reader. Cardiac using the optical fingerprint reader, and within the gallery we also have some options, for example to extract text from some photos by simply holding down on it, which comes in handy. We can also hold down on some person to be able to extract it or crop it out of the picture. And if you select several images, you could also create a collage or a video. In addition to the art section where you can select some photos to transform them. The background, and you see a little more artistic photography. Regarding artificial intelligence functions, I have a specific video where I explain point by point how they work in Xiaomi. In this case specifically, the 2 options that the artificial intelligence photo editor does not integrate are to remove reflections and improve resolution. For some strange reason, Xiaomi has an artificial intelligence that is a bit fragmented. No device has all the options. There are a few. Options are a bit spread out, so it's weird. But it does have artificial intelligence functions applied to text, applied to voice recorder, applied to images, and even applied to call translation and other things. So it delivers well, although most of them are cloud-based. It doesn't have too many execution capabilities directly on the device, so it doesn't get to be that attractive. With regard to Google functions, we will have Circle to Search, something that until recently was exclusive to Galaxy devices. But now it is also available here, so you can search for anything on your screen simply by putting a circle, or you can also translate any content that is being displayed on the screen, or even search for a song quickly. You will also have access to Gemini, which is the Google Assistant that has generative artificial intelligence, so it's almost as if you were chatting with a friend who is very smart, or you can ask him several things, although it is still not as smart to control things in the system as if it was Google Assistant. In that sense, we still find several limitations in the voice assistant, especially implemented in Xiaomi. With regard to security, note that this device has an optical fingerprint reader. So it will work well enough, although in this case to be optical uses enough lighting to recognize the fingerprint. You can have a maximum of up to 5 records, and fortunately, in low light conditions, you can select not to illuminate as brightly to avoid being flashed. And you can also change the animation of the fingerprint recognition in case you want some different. In fact, you also have shortcuts when unlocking, although you cannot customize them, so there really is a very limited variety. Just hold your finger on top and see that lets you add an event to the calendar. Start a search or scan a QR code, but I insist it would be more useful if it allowed us to add more shortcuts. We will also find facial recognition, although it is only in 2 dimensions, so the manufacturer itself does not. Recommends using it if your priority is security. And for a comfortable experience, it has a smart unlock that as long as it detects that a Xiaomi Bluetooth device such as a watch or headphones is connected, it could stay unlocked. However, it does not have the Google extended unlock that virtually all Android devices have, which is similar but much more advanced. In the File Manager, we will find hidden the secure folder. Just open the recent documents view and then slide down to be able to reveal the private folder, which you can access through a pattern that can be different from your lock screen or of course also by fingerprint. But interestingly, this device also offers the option of second space. So note that at the time of unlocking, I can enter with my main pattern to the space, traditional from my cell phone. But if I use a different pattern, I can enter the second space that could be useful, for example, to separate work from fun. So this workspace has everything separated, accounts, applications and absolutely everything separately, and with a simple button you can switch to the first space, obviously verifying you. Only in this case does not integrate a child mode that could also be useful. But if we are going to find the option to lock applications, several of these options come within the security application, and note that here you can configure which applications will request your fingerprint or your pattern to access them. It also has an option to hide apps from the main screen and another option to clone apps to be able to use 2 accounts, for example, of the same app on this cell phone. In this case, it does not incorporate a private VPN from Xiaomi to help users to have more privacy in networks. The device does have public Wi-Fi, but if it includes its own antivirus, it is not in collaboration with any cybersecurity company. So we do not know how effective it is. But it helps to have an additional scan against malware so as not to rely only on Google Play Protect. And since I mentioned Google Play Protect, obviously has all the Google security options. So in the description, I leave you a link where you can use and know them in detail, with the exception of the extended unlock that, as I told you just a moment ago, it doesn't come on this device. Let's go now to talk about the battery, which has a capacity of 5000 mAh. This may sound to you a very short capacity compared to what some other manufacturers launch with silicon and carbon batteries. But in practical life, they yield the same. So you could perfectly imagine that the manufacturer says it is a 6500 mAh battery, and anyway, it yields the same as it is. So in this case, the processor, if you get to consume enough, if you put a very intense test, managed to narrowly exceed the 4 hours, so it did not disappoint. But if it is a processor that consumes enough energy if you put heavy tasks, and if that heavy task you put it in the background while you do other things in the foreground, the device somehow improves a little, reaching almost 4.5 hours. But does not have such an advanced management of these applications running in the background. So maybe you're going to need a normal audio saver mode for day-to-day use in order to have a little more aggressive power management, and the device will last a lot longer. Obviously, this will depend a lot on the type of user you are, but in reference to other devices, I think it stays in the average. Fortunately, it also incorporates the ultra power saving mode that I always comment that it is useful for emergency issues. But since we are talking about emergency issues, if you have your charger at hand, believe me, you will not suffer from battery because it charges very quickly. In my test with 15 minutes, it reached 60%, and as you do not see the graph, in the first minutes it reaches a very high power. It does not reach 120, but it maintains a high power at all times. So even the charge ended in less than half an hour. To be exact, it was 29 minutes with 40 seconds in our test, but definitely with a little while. You put it to charge, you recover practically the entire battery, so you should not worry too much about that. The cart is very good. Although it must also be said that the charger ends up being a little bigger and heavier than we would like for something more portable, but it is very powerful. Another positive thing is that it supports wireless charging, although in this case with Xiaomi's own protocol. So the positive thing is that it reaches 50 watts. The negative thing is that to reach those 50 watts, you need the original Xiaomi charger. Obviously, if you can charge it wirelessly with other wireless chargers, but you're not going to take advantage of the 100% of its power. And finally, in this block does not have reversible wireless charging, something that would have been interesting, although I understand that they want to reserve that feature only for completely flagship devices. Since here we are talking about a device that wants to be high-end, and take care of the battery if it has smart charging and charging lock, so you have good mechanisms so that the battery does not degrade so quickly over time. In connectivity, we will find something positive, because if it is compatible with 5G networks, which was expected, it is also compatible with Wi-Fi 6 networks, which is also expected at this price, and fortunately also has support for eSIM, something that is not so common in Xiaomi devices, so if you usually travel. You will have a much more convenient experience by simply adding your data plan with a QR code instead of having to go to a store to buy your physical SIM card. In addition, through software, you also have options to restrict the data usage of apps so that they can only access the internet over Wi-Fi, so you can perfectly manage that not only in the background, but also in the foreground. It also has Bluetooth 5.4, which offers very good stability and very good speed. And All Positive also has NFC, so you can make payments with your cards added here simply by bringing the cell phone to the banking terminals. And obviously you can also connect accessories through the USB port C, and has wireless projection both in mirrored format and in a format where you can hide notifications or private content so that they are not seen on the projected screen. Although it doesn't have wired projection through HDMI adapter or something like that, I think that would have also been another important addition considering the high price that it has. It also has Android Auto, and in terms of sensors we are going to find good news. Because of entry we have a good amount with the geomagnetic field sensor, orientation, gyroscope and others. But the news that draws more attention is that if it has a physical proximity sensor, something that Xiaomi at times sacrifices, but here fortunately it will work well. Plus it has infrared that in conjunction with the MI remote application will allow us to use the cell phone as a universal remote control for TVs, air conditioners and other devices. As for the Xiaomi ecosystem, it has definitely been improving and taking very important steps. In this case, it does not yet have HyperOS 2.0, so it is not yet so advanced, but little by little, as I say, the devices of Xiaomi can interact better with each other. You have Xiaomi Share to send and receive files. You can have the clipboard shared. You can share the camera from one cell phone to another for a much more advanced experience. But what I will be emphasizing the most is that Xiaomi distributes its laptops in this side of the world, since in China they are popular, and I guess they will have a good interaction and integration between all their devices. But at least for here, it feels the ecosystem still incomplete if we don't have the laptop. Although fortunately Xiaomi is not perceived as dependent on Google as other manufacturers, as it has its own store called App Mall. It also has its own implementation for file sharing as Xiaomi Share, and also has its own Xiaomi Home app to be able to add home devices, although it is mainly compatible with the brands that Xiaomi handles. So internationally you cannot add other brands' products to its application. That's where I think they could still improve, but I think if they're able to give us a relatively complete ecosystem experience in conjunction with Google, obviously they're going to finish rounding out the experience with Google Drive, with Google Home and with some other tools. But let me know in the comments what ecosystem experience you'd like to see available on Xiaomi that everything Y isn't yet. Let's go to our traditional app opening test while I tell you about the specs that this device has. In terms of performance, it incorporates the MediaTek Dimensity 9300 Plus processor, a fully flagship processor. Although not of the most recent generation, but of the last generation. But either way, it is very powerful. It is also accompanied by 12 GB of LPDDR4X RAM and 512 GB of UFS 4.0 storage. So in theory, it has everything you need for. The disadvantage is that it has a very high performance, and as you can see, practically 2 seconds on average to open each application. It is one of the fastest devices we have tested recently. So it is confirmed that the processor is very, very powerful. The applications will run with a lot of speed, even if you go opening several applications does not start to get slow or clumsy. But as you realize, it seems that if we are noticing some restarts in applications, not all. But it seems that if there are some apps that are restarting, which is not so nice considering it has 12 GB of RAM and it is also supposed to have virtual RAM as well. So it seems like the multitasking experience might not be as advanced as it should be, or at least as you would expect from reading the specs with 12 GB of RAM. However, even though you might get to have some application restarts, the advantage is that they open really very fast. The disadvantage is I am noticing a bit more serious overheating than I would like at the moment, So I think that even though it's a powerful processor, the overheating could work against it at times. As I said, it has virtual RAM memory. By default, it comes with 6 gigabytes. You can extend it up to 12 gigabytes, or you can disable it, which from my point of view would be the most advisable because it does not really seem to take advantage of it. And in storage, Xiaomi has done something strange in this generation because in addition to the 512 gigabytes, it adds you another 16, so somehow you get back the storage that is using the system, which is quite curious. We would have to see how it behaves when it is finally about to fill up completely, but it is a really very good amount of storage, so also in this sense it complies very well. But let's test more or less what is the speed of this storage, because supposedly it is UFS 4.0, but note that it actually has speeds a little unstable for very brief moments if it reaches the speed limit. But most of the time it stays a little lower, so it does not seem to be so optimized, and even in the right speed, it also falls short of what we would have imagined. That's strange. But as I always tell you, let's go to a real life test by exporting these videos. Let's do the test in 4K. Remember that it has a total duration of 1 minute and all clips have been recorded with this device. And presto, it has behaved really very well. It only took 17 seconds, so it has a very good performance. Let's go to the games, and we already know the curious thing about Xiaomi, that Game Turbo is hosted in the security options, and then when you open it, it's actually game space. So these are inconsistencies that Xiaomi still doesn't fix. But well, here we are going to find the list of games that we have installed. Of course, you can add more if it has not detected them automatically. But here the novelty is that we can select some power consumption or performance profile depending on what will be our priority when playing. If you want to give the highest possible quality or prefer to have better performance on battery, there is you. I say it will depend entirely on your taste. In the settings, we will also find some options to find additional buttons when playing. Shortcuts to applications that I will show you in a moment, and we will also find the performance mode options so that when cleaning the memory, you can add some exceptions of applications that you want to remain running. Despite having cleaned the Wi-Fi optimizations and some simple do not disturb options, but honestly, it is not as sweet as advanced in games as we have seen in other devices, and when opening a game, note that you can slide in this area to open Game Turbo. In this case, you have a button to optimize the overall performance of the device, also to clean the memory or clean the storage, and of course you have shortcuts to applications so that without leaving your game you can answer a message or something like that. You could also optimize the control and touch response on the screen. You have a button to avoid any kind of interruption with the Do Not Disturb mode, and there is also a button to make screenshot in image and video capture. Later, we will find a button to change the color representation of the screen in case you want to visualize the game with a different style. And you also have an option to project the screen wirelessly as well. Manage the Wi-Fi connectivity and of course control the brightness with this sidebar. You can also change the style in which you receive notifications, because notice that by default the window appears in this way. In fact, we can swipe down to respond, but if we don't want that notification to interrupt us, we can change the style using this button, and notice that now the notification will actually appear as a strip that is sliding across the screen to be able to read it more easily, although it has a very short limit of characters. Then we will find voice modifier, so that in games that have audio chat, your voice sounds in different ways, and finally access to useful timers for some specific games. In PUBG, we chose the Ultra HDR quality at an ultra rate, but note that by also lowering the graphics to a fluid level, we can access an extreme ultra rate, so first we gave it priority. We have to run with maximum graphics quality, and in this case we will say that it meets what one would expect in a device of this price. It has virtually no low peaks, controls its temperature well, perfect stability, and obviously the graphics look with good textures, advanced good reflections and more in this graphic configuration, reaching 40 frames per second on average. Then we gave priority to the fluidity, although obviously we sacrifice graphic quality, but observe that it is able to reach 120 frames per second without too many complications. We are also not going to observe low peaks or anything like that, so it has a really very good performance at the time of playing. And again, I find it curious that here it controlled the temperature very well, despite the fact that in my application test it came to heat up more than I expected. In this case, Xiaomi integrates the de-ice loop system with which they have liquid and vapor to cool the processor, and it seems that It does it in a good way. In fact, when it got hot during applications, it didn't take long to cool down. So I guess it was a very specific thing because in our gaming test we confirmed that it really handles the temperature well. Then we played Legends and of course we chose the highest graphics on Ultra at 60 frames per second, and for a moment it tried to go up to 120 frames per second. But this game, it stays very little time at that high rate after a bit. So that's why the average is 98 frames per second. But it kept practically perfect stability once it went down to 60. Because the lowest it got was 58 frames per second. So overall you maintain a very smooth gameplay. Obviously it depends on each game you use, but if we are going to find a very good gaming experience with good cooling, good power, good screen, good sound. In the SpongeBob game we set the resolution to high epic quality to 60 frames per second with smoothing enabled. And in this case again the experience was really very good. Here it got to warm up a little more than usual. But still gave a very positive experience. Note that it has no low peaks practically, but maintains a very fluid feeling in the game. You will not notice fluctuations or moments of freezing. So it is a very good choice for those who like to play the game, like to play games. Finally, we played Genshin Impact. By default, it gives us the high graphics quality, which is already outstanding. But of course, we turned it up to very high, at 60 frames per second with motion blur set also in very high quality, and the experience again was very good. The truth is that the device has performed in a positive way, although in this case we tested the game on a separate day to the previous games. So let's just say it didn't have the accumulated heating from past games, but anyway, we found a really very good performance. I think this is one of the best devices for gaming without necessarily sacrificing other things, because there are other devices very focused on gamers that can get to sacrifice other elements, but I think this device is ideal for gamers who also want to have a good camera and some other elements of this high end. In conclusion, I think it is a really very complete device of the best we will find in this segment that in fact does not have so many competitors. Ideally find it in discount to become even more attractive, but overall has good screen, good cameras, but still with inconsistencies when switching between a camera and another. But overall, I think they could get a meet. Has good sound too. The performance, of course, is good. A battery that, although it is in the average, I think we do not need much more, having a 120 watts charger at hand. And overall, it is a device that behaves very well, so it is recommended. I hope you like this video. If so, you know you can indicate it, and we'll see you next time.